To a large extent, I'm a very traditional Unitarian. I only founded in the year 2000, so maybe my voice looks give it away, but I was 32, I think, when I became a Unitarian. Very traditional, as I say, one God, no hell. And of course, many people see Unitarian thought as something that happened in sort of the 17th century. I'm no theologian, and I haven't studied at any sort of academic level. But when I first started thinking about all this, I was a Methodist. I didn't even know that we existed. But I realised that things didn't add up. When I first discovered that Unitarians existed, I think I expected a church where every week we would gather to work out how and why God was one, not three. But essentially, other than that, it would be like most churches. Hopefully, we're not like most churches. When I arrived at Westgate Chapel, like yours, it's a bit of an iconic building set in its time. Mine's set in 1752. But I was in for quite a surprise when I got there. Even when I got to Westgate, which had a smaller congregation than you have here, we had people with no belief in God whatsoever, others with quite a traditional Christian belief, and every shade that comes in between. So many beliefs in God, including a belief that God didn't exist. So today I'm wanting to look at these many faces of God and how we're to deal with them. When I was young and impressionable, rather than old and impressionable, I saw the Egyptian god Set for the first time. I think I was probably about 8, and I don't know whether anyone can think how I would have come across such a god. Have we got any Doctor Who fans in the audience? So you know that the form that I came across the god Set was in the form of Sutekh, one of the baddies in Doctor Who. He was called Sutekh the Destroyer. He'd been imprisoned by his brother Isis at a time when all the gods were battling each other, and it sparked an interest in these gods. Now, he was one of these gods that's about death and destruction and knocking everything down. Osiris was the god of the underworld and the god of the dead, and he'd be helped in his task by Thoth, the god of wisdom. Every aspect of life had a specialist god. There'd be a god for getting up and a god for going to sleep. Someone that you could turn to if you needed help with a particular task, or to get you through things like a risky childbirth. All the important things in life had a deity associated with them. And even aspects of the afterlife had a whole host of gods and monsters that needed attention and looking after if you were going to have a good life after you died. There was only one challenge put forth to that view, if you remember, when the Pharaoh Akhenaten came to the throne and he said, all these different gods, they're a load of nonsense, there's only one God. That was the sun disk. He's capable of looking after everybody's needs, and that idea went down so well that once he died, they carved his name off every building that he'd ever put up and totally forgot about it. They went back to worshipping their many, many, many faces of God. And we can see this pattern happening again with the Greeks, who had, albeit a different creation story, but again they had a God for everything. They ended up with a whole host of deities to look after things like war, peace, hearth, home, the harvest, and then the Romans came along and said, that's a good idea, we must have thought of that, because all your gods are very, very similar to our gods, but our gods have different names, so obviously we thought about them first. But they carried on this tradition. And then we came to Constantine, and Constantine decided that, yes, they're all under one God, even though he did have it down as the invincible sun. and there was a little bit of confusion there. But that then became conflated, obviously, with Christianity. An invincible Son with an O. Shifting the Christian Sabbath away from the Saturday to the Sunday, so that all new ideas of God could put a single face forward. Now, there's no more obvious a sign that we were once invaded by someone else, by the fact that we have Woden's Day, and Hugh's Day, and Thor's Day, and Frigga's Day, all still marked to this day. But again, all the differences there will be wiped again by the worshippers of the invincible Son. The many, many faces of God all being merged into one God, even though this God suddenly had a triune nature, and maybe through that God lost something. Now, you've hopefully all got a 100% genuine diamond. I have a diamond, and it's red, so that you can see it nice and clearly. This likewise is genuine, and it must be because my sister bought me it, and she would never buy me a fake diamond. Now, this isn't just because I am incredibly kind and generous that I've given you all a 100% genuine diamond. The issues that I've been tackling with today are the issues that I've been wrestling for many years, including when I was a Methodist. I grant you the method doesn't work out with a raw diamond. If anybody's going to try this with a big sort of lump of glassy looking substance, it doesn't quite work. It has to be cut into facets so that we can see into the heart of the gem. Anybody know how many facets a 100% genuine diamond like the one you have now has? When you get home, you will be counting them, I'm sure. But if you look very, very carefully, you'll find that there are 58, including the colour, the bit at the top that we usually look through. That's not the only face of the diamond. It's the one that we tend to look through, isn't it? We tend to look through that big one at the top. But if you look through any of the other facets in a diamond, you'd see a different image. The light would go into it differently. Different quality of light, different angle to view it from. And that's how I started looking at these many faces of God, all belonging to the one face. Back to Mrs. Vicker. Cheers, everyone. I had 1 pint last night in Newcastle. Where did we go? Went to Spoons and had a meal. I had a pint with it, and because I drink so rarely, it quite affected me. So that's a little bit hair of the dog. A lot of sympathy for Mrs. Vicker. I think she's a wonderful character. But she's only seen one face of God. And that's not a happy face. The church that she belongs to doesn't present a happy-faced God. The God who looks down on Mrs. Vicker has a frown. She sees a world where every good thing in her life has to be handed over in tribute. This has been good, I'd better give it to God. And it's created a world that's quite sad and quite judgmental for her. It may be the people around her that are doing that. It may be just that she's got off on the wrong foot with God. And she feels unloved. And she sought solace in the bottle. Even if that bottle is 45 British wine. As though he could take something that was not that good and fortify it. As the story unfolds of Mrs. Vicker in A Bed Among the Lentils, we find that all the local off licences have stopped serving her. She's run bills up all around the church, buying sherry. And nobody will serve her anymore. So she goes further and further afield. And on the outskirts of Leeds, she finds an Asian shopkeeper who's willing to sell her sherry. And after a few visits, they get talking. He makes her a bed among the lentils in the back room. Covers it with beautiful Indian cloths. And amongst other things that go off there, they talk. He listens to her. And I don't think that she's ever been listened to in her life. And he introduces her to a world of many gods. And like those Greek gods, and like those Roman gods, and those Egyptian gods, they all look after different aspects of life. She also finds out about the fun and games that they have with each other. They seem too busy enjoying themselves to get involved in judgment. And we see Mrs. Bicker growing and developing and starting to live again. She weans herself off the bottle because she's found some value in herself. Now, her husband, of course, is going to claim credit for that from himself, the ladies, and the deity. But the viewer knows that the credit really goes to Mr. Ramesh and the many faces of his many gods, who managed to give her what she needed when she needed it. Pretty typical of Alan Bennett, that he actually leaves us with a sad tale at the end, where she hates what God has done and that she wouldn't do it to a dog. But I think that we can see the uplift in part of her story and take some joy. We also need to point out that while the Hindus believe in these myriads of gods, if you ever go to any of their fantastic temples, you'll see them covered in carvings of all these many gods, but at the same time they recognise that it's one God seen in a lot of different ways. So like us, now, as I said, when I came to Westgate, I was expecting something very simple. I suppose because I came from somewhere very simple. And when I got there, I found it was much, much, much more complicated. I'm sure you will have all been asked, so what do Unitarians believe? And I will usually say, ask a Unitarian, and then ask another Unitarian, and then ask another Unitarian. People find it a very hard concept to grasp. When I expected simplicity, were my expectations wrong? Or was it that the people at Westgate didn't have a clue how to do it? Had they not read the handbook? I know we don't often have Bible quotations as much as we may be used to, but I think within that Bible quotation that I gave you, I have some of the answers that I'm looking for. When Moses approaches the burning bush, he needs to know which God he's talking to. Because obviously, even though people talk about the Bible that it's one God in there, don't forget that God says, you shall have no other gods before me. Not, there are no other gods. He says, I'm to be the first one among the gods. But God, from the middle of that bush, tells him something very important. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He gives us a list so that we can identify him, but he gives us a list in a very specific way. He could have said, I'm the God of your father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But he doesn't. He uses a much longer list where he gives every element in turn, claiming to be the God of each one of them. So what? I hear you ask. What difference does it make? I think in my reading of things, it means that he's an individual God of individual people. This message is later confirmed by Jesus. Jesus uses the same list. He's the personal God to Abraham, and he's the personal God to Joshua, and he's the personal God to Joseph. People who claim a special status for Jesus will often quote his saying, the Father and I are one. They don't continue the quote. We have it in stained glass in that window there at Westgate. Because he then goes on to say, even as we all are one. He's telling us that the special relationship that he has with God is the special relationship that all people can enjoy. He confirms that God is one, but the approaches to God are individual, not universal. There are those who see the Bible as inerrant, and then they have to do a lot of fudging to get around the contradictions. But if God is in relationship with individuals, one individual's relationship might be very different. If you have a relationship with your father or your mother, it's not the same as with a brother or a sister, or indeed as it is with a child. Is it? You have various levels of relationship, and all those rules can be different. I'm sure that none of you have ever insulted a brother or sister, but it doesn't change the love that you have for them. Sometimes you can be a bit cheeky because you have that relationship. So when I came through those doors, I was actually wrong to expect people to think alike and to have one hymn sheet to sing from. But this is the trap that the church with the big C fell into, in my opinion. God makes it clear that he meets people as they are, as individuals. He's the God of the individual, and he tells us that. It was always the case that he was the God of the individual, rather than something that Unitarians have developed in more recent times. We were always right. We could have always made the badge of the t-shirt. For some of us, God is one. For others, we prefer to see different aspects at different times. But wherever we come on the spectrum, I think we have a job to show the positive side of the divine to an outside world that often belittles and derides the spiritual. Poor Mrs. Vicker saw a demanding and frowning God. The people around her were no help to her. It took a special man to show her the real, to show her the divine, and it opened her eyes to a greater possibility. It allowed her to live. And that's something that we're tasked to do as well, to show the kinder face of the divine, the loving face of the divine, and the accepting face of the divine. Muslims are said to have 99 names for God. I'm sure that we could top that. But what we have to do is make sure that those names are positive, make sure those names are useful, so that the divine can be used to uplift and support. Judgment has its case. Like when we think, I wouldn't wear that to go to the supermarket, not even at this time. But we need to follow a God who's a bit of a gem, and a bit of a gem with a smiling face. Amen. Now, the note.